starting on Chazara Aleph, line 38, towards the bottom of the page. Chazara Aleph, line 38. The Mishnah said that if a person is in the middle of doing a mitzvah and he kills b'shogeg, he's not going to be chayav galus. The way we knew that din was that the example the pasuk gave us of someone that's chayav galus is somebody that was chopping wood. And chopping wood, the Mishnah insists, is not a mitzvah. It's an optional activity. One of the Rabbanan, an anonymous rabbi in the Beis Medrash, said to Rava, Mimai, how do you know that the chopping of wood in the pasuk, the rishus, was a chopping of wood which was a rishus, which wasn't a mitzvah? Dilma, maybe. Machatavas eitz in the sukkah. Maybe the Mishnah was talking about chopping wood for the sukkah. The pasuk was talking about chopping wood to build a sukkah. Umachatavas eitzim dimaracha. Or a person's chopping wood to put a fire on them, to build a fire on the mizbeach. But and even so, Amarachmana, the Torah said, legally you should go to Galus. So your whole source for your din, that if you're doing a mitzvah, you don't go to Galus, that's all because the pasuk used an example of chopping wood. Who said chopping wood is not a mitzvah? Maybe he was chopping wood for a sukkah or for the mizbeach. Omar Lei, so Rava said back to him.
Where do you start by?
38 on Chazara Aleph. 2 dots there. I'm 2 lines below that right now. Omar Lei, so Rava said back to him, no. Chopping wood for a sukkah, chopping wood for the mizbeach is not considered a mitzvah. Why? Kivan, since the matzah chatov, if you would find wood already chopped, lav mitzvah, there's no mitzvah to go chop new wood. So hashtanami, even now when he didn't find wood for his sukkah or for the mizbeach, lav mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah to chop the wood. Meaning, what Rav is saying to him is, a mitzvah is something which you are absolutely mechuyev to do. Chopping wood for your sukkah or chopping wood to put on the mizbeach is not something you're mechuyev to do. If you happen not to have any wood in your woodshed, so go chop some wood. But the chopping of the wood itself is not a mitzvah. It's a way to get to the mitzvah in the event that you don't have wood. Let's call it a sometimes mitzvah is not a mitzvah. Omar, Esibi Ravina Rava, line 41. So Ravina asked Rava, I'm going to show you that our Mishnah is going to call something a mitzvah, even though it's not really always a mitzvah. The Mishnah says, Yatza, we exclude from Galus, Ha'ava Makas Penoi, a father who's hitting his son, or a Rebbe that was hitting his Talmud, or Shliach Bezdin, or a Shliach Bezdin, someone who was giving Malkus to a person who did an Aver. Says Ravina, according to you, Rava, Lema, let us say, I'll tell you the same thing that you told me. Kivan, since. Let's talk about the father hitting his son. Why is the father hitting his son? Because the kid wasn't learning, wasn't paying attention to his Rebbe. So, in this case, isn't that also only a sometimes mitzvah? If the kid would have been learning, the father would have no mitzvah to hit him. Says the Gemara, Kivan, since, Dilu Gomer, if he would have been learning, if he would have been doing his whatever he had to do, lav mitzvah would not be a mitzvah to hit him. So a hashtanami now also, even though the kid is not learning, lav mitzvah, you should not consider that a mitzvah. Should not be considered a mitzvah to hit him. So Ravina is turning the tables on Rava. Rava, you're saying chopping wood for a sukkah is not really a mitzvah. It's only necessary if you don't have wood. So a father hitting his son should also not be considered a mitzvah. It's only a mitzvah if the kid is not learning. So the Gemara answers on that, no. Hasam nearby a father hitting his son. Afagav the Gomer, even if the kid is learning, mitzvah, it's still a mitzvah for the father to hit him. Doesn't mean every single day or every minute. But occasionally, the father has to show him there's somebody watching over you, there's somebody making sure that you do your thing. Because the pasuk says, quote, Yaser bin chavayanichacha. Yaser is a lashon of Yisur. Give your son some pain, hit him. V'yanichacha, and he's going to bring you nachas. The yitein ma'adanim is going to bring delicacies. He's going to provide good things l'nafshecha for your soul, end quote. So the pasuk there tells us that a father hitting his son is beneficial even if the kid is doing everything he's got to do. Keeps him on the straight and narrow. So that was one answer, Rava said. So therefore, we're back to our statement that our example in the pasuk of a person chopping wood was a rishus, so it was not a mitzvah, and therefore, if somebody was doing a mitzvah and he killed b'shogeg, he's not going to be chayav galus. Hadar Amar Rava. Later, Rava said, I gave you a nice answer, but I have a much better answer. Lav milsa. It is nothing, the Amri, which I said. Meaning the answer that I gave you wasn't necessary. I have a much better answer. Why? Because the pasuk says, quote, Vasher Yava Esreu Bayar, end quote. We underline the word Vasher. Asher means someone that will choose to come upon his friend in the forest. He made the decision to go chop wood. Now, if he was doing a mitzvah, we wouldn't say he chose to chop wood. He's obligated to chop wood. The fact that we use the word Asher which means he chose to, that tells me the iboy, if he wants to, ayil, he enters the forest to chop wood. The iboy, and if he wants to, loyal, does not enter the forest. It's an optional activity. This pasuk is clearly talking about an optional chopping of wood. If you would think mitzvah, that the pasuk is talking about a guy that was chopping wood for a mitzvah. Misagi, would it be sufficient? Does he have the option, the loyal, to not enter the forest? Meaning the pasuk, what the Gemara is saying right now, Rav is saying right now is that the word va'asher in the pasuk implies that the person went into the forest with the option to not go. If he was doing a mitzvah, then he didn't have an option to not go, he had to go. So the pasuk is using a lashon which implies something which was a rishos. That's the end of Rav's words. The Gemara is going to question that. The Gemara is going to say, is it true that the definition of the word va'asher is always doing an optional activity? Amalei Ravado bar Ava. 3 lines at the bottom, the Rav. Ravado bar Ava said to Rav, Kol eicha, everywhere, the chsiv asher, that it says, quote unquote, asher, that it says the word asher, the iboihu, question mark, exclamation point. It means the iboi, if he wants to, who it is. Does the word asher always mean optional? I will show you some place that it does not mean optional. Let's just do this outside before we see it inside. The pasuk is going to say that if a person comes into the Beis HaMikdash when he's tamei, he touched the mace, comes into the Beis HaMikdash, he is chayav kares. Now the pasuk says a person asher yitma, that will choose that asher will become tamei, is going to be chayav kares if he comes into the Beis HaMikdash. If you are going to translate the word asher to mean optional, that means the only time a person is not allowed into the Beis HaMikdash, if he had a choice to become tamei, he had a choice not to. Should I go to the Ribnitz's cave or not? And he chose to go. Now he's not allowed into the Beis HaMikdash. What was that? There is a Gemara that says Kibbutz Tzaddik Avenu Utamen. But when you go to the Ribnitz's cave, there's a lot of other kvarim that you got to pass by. So.
You go where?
What was that? What means your neighbor? Now or he was when he was alive? Right now. Oh, right now he's your neighbor.
Good buddy of mine.
Yeah. You ever stop by there?
What?
Ever stop by there?
Do I ever stop by?
But you just said you read the book, right?
What? Yeah.
You said it's out of this world.
Unbelievable.
I bought the book. Does that count?
It's very.
I made it like 2 pages.
I read the whole book in like one shot.
2 pages is good for Yaakov, don't know?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Lots of credit.
You got to do the thank yous by the author. All right, back in here. Right, so again, so the pasuk says.
It wasn't respected. I don't think they respect.
The pasuk says.
They didn't know about
He only became famous once he was Moshe's neighbor.
Cause and effect, no one knows.
You have a lot of neighbors.
Yeah, a lot of neighbors. Okay, so again, so the pasuk says, "Vish asher yitma," person asher will become tamei, then he's not allowed into the Beis HaMikdash. Says Rav to Rav, if you're going to translate the word asher to mean an optional activity, that means when a person chose to become tamei, he's not allowed into the Beis HaMikdash. What if a person had no choice? For example, a person found the mace mitzvah. Then, as if a dead body is found somewhere along the roadside and there's nobody there to bury it, there is a chiyuv to go take care of that body. Not just an average person, even a kohen gadol is mechuyev to become tamei to go take care of that body. So the Gemara says, if you're going to translate asher to mean optional, that would tell you that if a person became tamei through burying a mace mitzvah, he had no option there, so he's allowed into the Beis HaMikdash. And that's a wild thing to say. We know a person's tamei can't go into the Beis HaMikdash no matter how he became tamei. Says the Gemara, Amalei Ravada Barav Rava, 3 lines at the bottom, Chasam Adalf. Kol Eicha, is it true that Kol Eicha, anywhere, the chsiv that it says asher, the word asher, di'ibayu, that means if he wants to, optional? Elameata, if so, Elameata, if so, and the pasuk says, quote, V'ish asher yitma, below yischata, end quote. The person asher becomes tamei, that means he chooses to become tamei, below yischata, and does not become tahor, did not do the process of becoming tahor. Does that also mean iboy mitame? If he wants to, he becomes tamei. Iboy, if he wants to, loy mitame, does not become tamei? If that's so, then meis mitzvah. If a person came tamei through a meis mitzvah, do loy sagi, he doesn't have the option to loy mitame, to not become tamei. He has to become tamei. He doesn't have the option to avoid becoming tamei. Hochonami the potter. Is it so that he's going to be potter from kares if he comes into the Beis HaMikdash? Is that true?
So he doesn't have to become.
He has to become tamei. He has no option. He finds the dead body. It's deicha almost kol Torah kula. The Gemara Megillah, I think it is, goes through a list of what comes before what.
Is
It's
making
deicha
a minion
avoda.
for someone considering this one's also.
What are you making a minion? For someone to have a kura?
Burying someone, they don't have time.
I think in halacha it says only if he's not going to be buried with town. Whatever is
What
necessary for the burial.
No, he'll be buried, just no kara.
Does he have to stop doing another mitzvah to do mace
I
mitzvah?
don't think that's
I'm not sure.
considered a mace mitzvah, but yeah, I guess right. If it's a real.
I'm not sure. I gotta check that up. I'm not sure. But the Gemara Megillah goes through a whole list of things. It's deicha avodah, it's deicha Talmud Torah, it's deicha a whole bunch of different things. That if you have the option, should I go do that or should I go bury this mace mitzvah? Mace mitzvah. Even Torah the Rabbim, even if it's going to be mavatal 1,000 people from learning Torah, that you're going to go. This guy's the biggest Rosh Hashiva, and it's going to be mavatal 1,000 people from learning Torah. If he goes to bury this mace mitzvah, he's mechuyev to do it. So it's very chomer. He doesn't have an option not to. So hachanami, the potter is, bottom line, is he going to be potter? Of course. If he subsequently goes into the Beis Hamikdash, says the Gemara, you're right. The word asher means optional. In this specific case, that's the end of the question. Hachanami, the potter? Question mark, exclamation point. Could it be that he's going to be potter for going into the Beis Hamikdash? And the Gemara is going to say, I maintain that the word asher means optional. However, here there's a special pasuk which tells me that even if he became Talmid Torah Meis Mitzvah, he's still going to be Chayav Karas for entering the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Gemara, Shani Asam. Thereby Meis Mitzvah, it's different. The Amar Kra, the pasuk adds 2 extra words. At the end of the pasuk that tells him not to enter the Beis Hamikdash, shall be Chayav Karas. The pasuk adds Chesed and Beis 2 words. Quote, Tamei Yiyeh, end quote. He will be Tamei. And from that we learn, Mikol Makayim, period. Any way that he becomes Tamei, even if he became Tamei through a Meis Mitzvah, he will be Chayav Karas if he enters the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara has a kash on that. The Gemara asks, wait a minute. How could you tell me that the words Tamei Yiyeh are teaching me that if someone became Tamei through a Meis Mitzvah, he's not allowed into the Beis Hamikdash? We have a brisa which taught us something else from this same pasuk. The pasuk actually said 5 extra words. It said Tamei Yiyeh, he will be Tamei. Oid, still, Tum'asei boy, his tumah is upon him. So, at the end of the pasuk of saying not to go into the Beis Hamikdash, says the Gemara, Humi Boyle, I needed those words Tamei Yiyeh. Look at the Tanya for that which you learned in the brisa. The pasuk says Tamei Yiyeh, quote unquote Tamei Yiyeh. This is the brisa. The brisa quotes the pasuk Tamei Yiyeh, and we learn from that l'rabbis we're going to include in the avera of going into the Beis Hamikdash Tamei someone that's a tvul yoim. Tvul yoim means somebody who was Tamei, he already went to the mikvah, and after a person goes to the mikvah, he's got to wait until nightfall to be allowed into the Beis Hamikdash. So he already did everything he needs to do to become tahor, but he didn't yet have nightfall. Tvul Yom means someone who toveled that day. And Tumasei Bay, the pasuk continues, Tumasei Bay is quote unquote Tumasei Bay, that his tumah is still upon him. The rabbis, that will include Mechusar Kippur. Mechusar Kippur means somebody, he already went to the mikvah, he already waited for nightfall. However, there are some people, a Zava, Yeledas, a Mitzvah, 4 types of Tamei people that besides for going to the mikvah and waiting for nightfall, one second, trying to write and talk at the same time. Besides going to the mikvah and waiting for nightfall, they also have to bring a korban. They're called Mechusar Kippur, and they're lacking a kapara, they still need something. So the Brisa says that Tamei Yiyeh teaches us that a Tvul Yom, someone that tovel that day and didn't wait for nightfall, is not allowed into the Beis Hamikdash. And Tumasei Bay teaches us that a Mechusar Kippurim, this person that's missing his kapar, didn't yet bring his korban, he's not allowed into the Beis Hamikdash. That's the end of the Brisa. So the point of the Gemara bringing this, the Gemara is asking, how could you tell me that the words Tamei Yiyeh are teaching us that a person who became Tamei through a Meis Mitzvah is not allowed into the Beis Hamikdash? We see Tamei Yiyeh is coming to teach me Tvul Yom is not allowed into the Beis Hamikdash. Let's just see it again from the top line. The Gemara asks Akasha, Humi Boyle, that pasuk was needed. Look at the time for that which you learned in a brisa. The pasuk says, quote unquote, Tamei Yiyeh. He'll be Tamei. The rabbis, this will include Tvul Yom, someone who just toveled that day and did not yet have nightfall. The pasuk continues, quote unquote, Tumasei Bay, that his tumah is upon him. The rabbis, that will include Mechusar Kippurim, someone who's lacking kapara, meaning he didn't bring his korban yet. That's the end of the brisa and the end of the kasha. On that, the Gemara Amar Lei. So Rava said back to him, Ano me oid ka'amina. I'm learning it from the extra word oid. I'm learning meis mitzvah. So when Rava said, I learned it from Tamayir, he didn't mean from the words Tamayir. He meant the pasuk Tamayir still has an extra word, the word oid, and that's going to teach us if someone became Tamay through a meis mitzvah. He's going to be chayav kares for entering the base of Mikdash. So we have three drushes from this pasuk. A tvul yoyim, that means he's waiting for nightfall. Mechutz Kippur, we already did everything, he just needs to bring a carbon. And someone who became Tamay through a meis mitzvah is also going to be chayav kares if he enters the base of Mikdash. So that's the end of Rava justifying his words. Again, just to work backwards, Rava started off by saying when the pasuk says Asher, the guy Asher came into the forest, that means he came in to do something optional, he wasn't doing a mitzvah. The Gemara asked, but it says Asher by becoming Tamei, that sounds like it was not talking about a meis mitzvah. Says Rava, you're right, but the word Oid tells you even if he became Tamei from a meis mitzvah, he's not allowed into the Beis HaMikdash, and if he does enter, he will be chayav kares. Okay, let's get to the next Gemara. We'll try to get to the Mishnah today. We'll see if we make it. Says the Gemara, Ika. Now, this conversation took place. Let's just remember the steps in the conversation because we're going to plug it into a new Gemara. Steps in the conversation were, the Mishnah said something was talking about Rishus. The case of Golos in the pasuk is talking about Rishus. One of the Rabbanan asked Rava, maybe he was talking about chopping wood for a sukkah, for the Mizbeach, which is a mitzvah. Rava answered back, that's not called a mitzvah. That's circumstantial. You're out of wood, so you need to chop wood. That's not part of the mitzvah of sukkah, is not chopping wood. Of course, if you need beams, you need panels, so you'll chop wood. That's not called a mitzvah. And then Rava said, I have a better answer, because clearly that pasuk is talking about Rishus, because it says Asher. We're going to plug in those same four steps into a totally different Gemara. There's a pasuk in the Torah that says, 6 days of the week you should work, and the 7th day you should rest. And then the pasuk repeats, V'charish u'v'katzir tishbis. Don't plow and don't harvest. So here we go. Ika, there was some people, the Masni law means they learned this conversation between the Hahume Rabban, that rabbi, and Rava, aha, on the following bryce. On the following Mishnah, rather. It's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says as follows, quote, the pasuk says, quote, V'charish u'v'katzir tishbais. You should rest from plowing and from harvesting. Those words are extra in the pasuk. Why? The pasuk begins, 6 days of the week you should work. On the 7th day, you should rest. Don't plow and don't harvest. Now when it said on the 7th day you should rest, you know what that included? 39 malachas. Don't write, don't build, don't tear, don't sow, don't plant, etc. And in there is also included, don't plow and don't harvest. So these words, Bachar, Shuvakatzer, Tishbais, are extra. They're not necessary. What are they coming to tell us? So the Mishnah is going to have a machlokes. Rabbi Akiva says, Eino itzarech loymar. The pasuk didn't. Rabbi Akiva says, before Rabbi Akiva even explains himself, he says this pasuk is not talking about Shabbos. The beginning of the pasuk is talking about Shabbos. 6 days of the week you work, and on the 7th day you rest. The last 3 words in the pasuk, don't plow and don't harvest, are no longer talking about Shabbos. They're talking about Shemitah. It's talking about even weekdays that you're not allowed to plow and harvest, which is Shemitah, the 7th year. It's no longer talking about the 7th day, rather it's talking about the 7th year. Now, we have a problem with that, says Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Eimer, Eino itzarech loymar. The pasuk didn't need to tell me, Chorish shel Shvias, not to plow in Shemitah. The Katzer shel Shvias, or not to harvest during Shemitah. Why didn't it have to tell me that? Shaharei kvar nem, I have another pasuk in the Torah which already said, quote, Sot choloi sizra, don't plant, don't sow your field during Shemitah. The karmecha and your vineyard, loy sizmar, you shouldn't harvest, end quote. So we already have a pasuk which tells me you can't work the land on Shemitah. What is this new pasuk telling me? Don't plow and don't harvest. Elo rather, says Rabbi Akiva, it's teaching me afilu charish shel erev shvius. You're restricted from plowing before Shemitah if the benefit of that plowing shenichnas l'shvius will enter Shemitah. Because plowing is not for immediate benefit. It's that the land should absorb nutrients and water in the future. So if you're a week or two before Shemitah and you're plowing, the benefit of that is only going to come about during Shemitah. You're not allowed to do that. That's what it means when it says don't plow. What does it mean when it says don't harvest? In line 9, the katzer shel shvius, and it's talking about the harvest of Shemitah fruit, Sheyatza, which went out of Shemitah, Limoitzoi Shvias, to the following year after Shemitah. Which means if I have an apple growing on a tree during Shemitah, and now Shemitah is over, and I pick it a day after Shemitah, that's still going to have the Kedusha of the time that it grew. So these are two limitations. The limitation of plowing and limitation of harvesting, which apply to Shemitah. But Shemitah itself, I don't need to tell me that you can't harvest or plant or plow. Rather, it's telling me don't plow immediately before Shemitah and be careful about harvesting immediately after Shemitah. That's Rabbi Akiva's interpretation of this pasuk. We're not going to go further with that. Rabbi Yishmael is really why we brought this Mishnah. Rabbi Yishmael says this Mishnah is talking about, this pasuk is talking about Shabbos. Why is the pasuk, and what's bothersome about this pasuk? That the pasuk said, "V'charish uvakatzer tishbais." Don't plow and don't harvest. Why is it singling out those two malachas, those two Shabbos malachas? Rabbi Shmuel in line 10, the pasuk was coming to tell you as follows. And let's speak this out outside again because it's a little bit of a fine point. The pasuk is telling us that you know when I told you not to harvest, when I told you not to plow. Those two isurim have to be on the same level. The isur don't harvest on Shabbos only applies where there's an isur don't plow. Now plowing, there's nowhere in the Torah that says there's a mitzvah to plow. So when it says don't plow, does that mean don't do a mitzvah of plowing? Doesn't mean that. It means don't do an optional plowing. I want to plant strawberries, don't plow. You want to sow your field, don't plow. But it's only talking about an optional plowing because there is only an optional plowing. Harvesting, there is a case in the Torah that says there's a mitzvah to harvest. That's the second night of Pesach. There's a mitzvah to harvest barley, which is brought as the Korban Omer the next day. So when the Torah said don't plow and don't harvest, the Torah is telling you whenever I told you don't plow, which means by an optional case, that's when you shouldn't harvest. Don't harvest, rishos, optional. But if you want to harvest for a mitzvah, you can even harvest on Shabbos. So if the second night of Pesach comes out on Shabbos and you need to go harvest your barley for tomorrow's Korban Omer, by all means, do it even on Shabbos. Again, you got the comparison? Wherever you can't plow, you can't harvest. And just like don't plow is talking about a case of rishos, so too don't harvest talking about a case of rishos. Says the Gemara. Where are we here? Rabbi Shmuel, line 10. Ma charish rishos, just like the plowing in the pasuk is talking about rishos, av katzer rishos, so to the harvesting is talking about rishos. Yatsa, this excludes kitzir ha'omer, harvesting for the Korban Omer, shu mitzvah, which is a mitzvah, which means it's excluded from the limitations from the isurim of Shabbos. You can do it on Shabbos. Could have a similar question. One of the Rabbanan asked Rava, who told you that plowing is always a rishos? Plowing is always amshel mimai. How do you know the charisha the rishos? The plowing is a rishos. Dilma maybe. We're talking about a guy that charishas oimer the mitzvah. He's plowing his field in order to plant barley for the Korban Omer, which is good. Pesach is in 6 months. He's got to have barley, so he's plowing for a mitzvah. Va'afilu hachi, that stands for, and even so, Amar Rachmana Tishbas. The Torah said, you got to rest. You can't do it. Amar lei. So Rava said back to him, no, plowing your field in order to be able to plant barley is not a mitzvah. Because kivan de matzah charish, since if he finds that he has a readily plowed field, ain't a charish, doesn't have to plow further. Right? There's no mitzvah to actually plow, he just has to have barley. So therefore, a mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah to plow your field. Again, we're going to have the same kasha as before. Ravina asks, Rava, our Mishnah.
Plow on Shabbos.
What was that?
He also doesn't have to plow.
Right, he can do it on Sunday, but the point is, if it's a mitzvah, so the Torah is telling you not to plow. Didn't say there's no other way to do it, but said if this would really be a mitzvah, so I found the case of plowing, that's a mitzvah. Says the Gemara. Ravina says to Rava, you're telling me that plowing for the Omer is only a sometimes mitzvah, it's a circumstantial mitzvah, and therefore you're not considering it a mitzvah. Our Mishnah calls that a mitzvah, because our Mishnah says, we're excluding from Golos, the father is hitting his son, Rebbe is hitting his Talmud or his Shliach Bezdin. Why are we excluding that from Golos? Lema, let us say, Kivan, since the Ilu Gomer, if the son would have been learning La Mitzvah, it wouldn't be a mitzvah to him, Hashtanami La Mitzvah. Now that the son's not learning, it should also not be considered a mitzvah. So I see from the Mishnah that even a sometimes mitzvah is still considered a mitzvah. On that, Rava answers the last narrow line, Hassam there by the father hitting his son, Abagav the Gomer, even if the kid is learning, Nami Mitzvah Kavod. The father is still doing a mitzvah, meaning hitting his son is always a mitzvah. The pasuk says, quote, Yaser bincha v'yanichecha. You give your son Yisurim, you hit your son, it'll bring you nachas. End quote. We didn't bring the end of the pasuk. We saw it earlier. Hadar Amar Rava, then Rava says, La Mil Sidam, you have a better answer. Because the Torah told you it's usher to harvest where it's usher to plow. Kitzira Dumya Decharisha. The Aveira of harvesting on Shabbos is only usher where there's an Aveira to plow. Macharisha. Just like plowing was only usher. All the cases of plowing, even if you want to call it a mitzvah. But if Motzah Charish, if he finds a plowed field, Einay Charish, then he never has a mitzvah to plow. So Av Katsira Nami, so too when it says don't harvest, that's a case where Matzah Katzar, if he would find harvested food, Einay Katzar, he would not have a mitzvah to harvest. However, V'yisal Kedaitach mitzvah, if you would think that the Torah is prohibiting you from harvesting for the mitzvah of Oimer, the mitzvah of Oimer is an absolute mitzvah. Because Matzah Katzar, even if he finds that he has harvested barley, Einay Katzar, is he not obligated to harvest more for the Korban Omer? Certainly he is. Mitzvah liktzar lahavi. It's a mitzvah for him to go harvest and bring more barley. Let me explain this last point. This is one of the more difficult points in the parak. Let's just go over the Shakov Tar of the last little piece of Gemara. The Gemara said as follows. Rabbi Shmuel explained the pasuk. The pasuk says, on 6 days of the week you work, and on the 7th day you should rest. Don't plow and don't harvest. The words don't plow and don't harvest are extra because he already told me on the 7th day I should rest. Says Rabbi Shmuel, it's telling you that the Chilul Shabbos of harvesting is only Chilul Shabbos if you find that same type of Chilul Shabbos by plowing. Now, plowing I only find Rishus. I only find plowing which is optional, and therefore it's only usher to harvest on Shabbos if it was an optional harvest. He's going for recreational harvest, but not if it's a mitzvah. Says the Gemara, wait a minute, what's your starting point? That plowing is always optional? What if he's plowing in order to plant barley so he should be able to bring the Korban Omer in 6 months from now? Isn't that a mitzvah? Says Rava, no, that's not called a mitzvah. He's only plowing because he didn't find a plowed field. But it's not an actual mitzvah to plow. He needs to have a plowed field, but the actual plowing is not a mitzvah. Whereas harvesting for the Korban Omer, he actually has to go and harvest for the Korban Omer. If he finds that he has a big sack of barley in his house, that can't be used. There's a mitzvah to harvest for the Korban Omer. On that, the Gemara went off on a little detour and said, wait a minute, father hitting his son is also not considered a mitzvah then. It's only if the son's not learning. The Gemara says, no. Father hitting his son is even if he is learning. Let's get back to the harvesting and the plowing. And then Rava says, I have a much better teretz on your kasha. You're asking me that I did find a case of harvesting, of plowing, which is a mitzvah, because he's plowing in order to have barley in 6 months from now bringing a korban. Fine, call that a mitzvah. But what level mitzvah is that? That's a mitzvah. If I don't have a plowed field, I have a mitzvah to go plow. So that I found a plowing which is a sort of mitzvah. But I never found plowing which is a full-blown mitzvah and there's no way out. I never found the Torah tell me you have to plow. Sometimes I'll have to because I need a plowed field in order to plant barley. But the Torah never said you must plow. So since the Torah never said you must plow, the Isser of plowing on Shabbos is either optional or by a mitzvah which is not absolute. So too, the Isser of harvesting on Shabbos, you can't harvest for optional reasons. You can't harvest for non-absolute mitzvahs. But if you have an absolute mitzvah, there's no way out. Like harvesting for the Korban Omer, there you could harvest even on Shabbos. Because that level mitzvah we don't find by plowing. If you don't find it by plowing, then we will not make it usher by harvesting either.